My stepmother moved me to my grandparents' house when I was 14 because, according to her, there was no room for me with her new twins. But now she plays the victim because my grandparents refused to include her children in the inheritance. My mother died when I was 12. I was the only child of my parents, and my mom had been sick for as long as I can remember. It was hard for both of us, but I never complained. I can't say the same for my dad. He started to resent my mom, and I don't think I ever saw him shed a single tear when she passed away. Maybe it was caregiver burnout, or maybe it was something else that led to his absolute lack of respect and coldness after her death. I don't know. All I know is that it made me sick to my stomach. She was still family, and she wasn't even a difficult patient. I cared deeply about her health problems. Even as a kid, I suffered seeing my mother in that condition and tried to help however I could. As she got sicker and needed more help, I never once felt burdened by it. I don't have a single bad memory of my mother. I was very close to her, and even as a little girl, whenever I saw my dad being mean or harsh with her, I couldn't stand it. That's when I started to dislike him, and over time, that dislike grew. So, my dad and I never had a good relationship, and after my mom died, neither of us tried to fix it. I didn't, because I didn't like him or how he treated my mom. He didn't, because he was too busy dating and looking for a new wife, which he found pretty quickly. So quickly, in fact, that I started to suspect he'd been cheating on my mom and seeing someone behind her back. It wouldn't have surprised me. Just 3 months after my mom's death, my dad introduced me to my stepmother, a woman who was 32 at the time. 2 months later, she had moved into our house, luggage and all, not just a toothbrush, and immediately started trying to replace my mom. All of my mother's things were packed away into boxes by her and stored. If anyone had visited our house back then, they would never have known my mom had ever lived there. My stepmother basically tried to erase her existence, and my dad gave her full permission to do whatever she wanted, no questions asked. I tried telling him that I lived there too, that I wanted to remember my mother, but talking to him was like talking to a wall. To him, my stepmother could do no wrong, and it was as if my mother had never existed. I wasn't the only one upset about what was happening. Other relatives tried to step in and tell my dad to slow down, but he's stubborn like a bull. Once he makes up his mind, nothing changes it. His decision was made, and nothing anyone said, aunts, grandparents, even some of his friends, could make him listen. No one knew what kind of spell my stepmother had cast on him, but it was strange how completely captivated he was by her. Obviously, I didn't like her. She was trying to replace my mother, but to be fair, she didn't like me much either. I remember getting into so much trouble because I didn't bond with her. My dad made my life miserable because of that, and it only got worse after they got married. Within a year of my mom's death, my stepmother and my dad were married. Most of the family was deeply disappointed in my dad, and many didn't even attend the wedding, including my paternal grandparents. They had truly loved my mom and had been two of her most vocal supporters. I'm so grateful for the support they gave her, and later, me. I owe them everything. I wouldn't have made it through life without them. A year later, my stepmother got pregnant. My dad was thrilled, and I think that's when the rest of the family finally accepted that she wasn't going anywhere, that she was here to stay. Yes, she wasn't leaving, but I was. I had started keeping my distance from my dad and her ever since they got married. Things had been tense at home since she moved in, but after the wedding, I tried to stay out of her way as much as possible, mostly keeping to my room. I avoided trouble by avoiding them, and I knew the feeling was mutual. Still, I never expected things to get as bad as they did. By the time she was 4 months pregnant, everything got worse. I know pregnancy hormones are a thing, but she honestly acted like a lunatic sometimes. My dad started getting fed up with her and began coming home late from work. I was usually home, and she'd yell at me, not just me, actually, she yelled a lot in general. I tried talking to my dad about it, but unsurprisingly, he wasn't supportive. To be honest, I didn't expect much, but I thought it was worth a try. Still, living in that house was becoming harder every single day. Part of me thinks she was acting like that just to make me move out on my own, that way, she wouldn't look like the villain. but I never did. If she wanted me gone, she'd have to say it herself. And eventually, the day came. We were sitting at the dinner table when she said she wanted to talk to me about something. She told me that she and my dad were having twins and that there wouldn't be enough room for me. Then she said I just sat around the house pouting and being a miserable little thing, her exact words, which I still remember. My dear father didn't even flinch. He said he didn't like the atmosphere I brought into the house, which is why he had decided that I would move in with my grandparents. Honestly, our house was big enough, there was no need for me to move out just to make room for the twins. This didn't just happen on its own. I looked at my dad when I said it. But he stayed silent. It was one of those decisions that were already made, and nothing I could say would change it. He had made it abundantly clear that I wasn't part of his real family, only my stepmother and her new babies were. And when someone tells you that, when they make it clear you're the unwanted child and they don't want to make space for you, something inside you breaks, and you never really heal from that. I still haven't, and it's been over 11 years. That night, when he didn't show up for dinner, I had already decided I wouldn't stay there another day. The next morning, I called my grandfather and told him what had happened. He was furious, but he told me not to do anything just yet. He wanted to see if they would actually go through with it. So he waited, and I waited. A week later, my stepmother came to me again, asking me to pack my bags because she was going to talk to my grandfather that night to ask if he would take me in. She had no idea that my grandfather already knew everything. He spoke to her and my father that evening and gave them both the lecture of their lives. By the time they hung up, my father was crying, and my stepmother was fuming. She stormed toward me, grabbed me by the arm, and shouted that I didn't have to be everyone's favorite, that I didn't deserve it. The next day, my grandparents came to the house, and I moved out with them. I still remember the last time I stood in my room, packing some of my mother's things. My dad walked in. I had hoped he might say something, anything, to make things a little better, to show that he cared. But he didn't. He just said there was no reason for me to take all that junk and tried to take it away from me. I fought back, with the strength of a 14-year-old, and managed to keep packing while he finally backed off. When I sat in the car, we drove for about 30 minutes. My dad started calling me, but I didn't answer. Within 2 weeks, I'd settled into my grandparents' house. It's easier to adjust when you're wanted somewhere. My dad called every day during the first week, and every day I refused to speak to him. Then he stopped calling. He had made his token effort to stay in touch so it would look like he wasn't such a bad guy after all, but he was, and I knew it. Even back then, I knew that my pain and silence would be used to prove that I was the one who didn't want contact. And even if my dad didn't twist it that way, I was sure my stepmother would. She had a talent for turning everyone into villains, except herself. It hurt. I won't lie, it was incredibly hard to accept that I had been abandoned, that I wasn't wanted. That my own parent couldn't even make the smallest effort to stay in touch. For years, I felt like I wasn't enough. But much of that pain was healed thanks to my grandparents. They did everything they could to make my life easier and more loving, and I'll always be grateful for that. Any experience I've had of a warm, functional relationship comes from them. Of course, my mom spoiled me too, but she was often sick, so I wouldn't call that a normal relationship. My grandparents, though they weren't her parents by blood, had something of her in them. It's like my parents had been swapped at birth. From what I know, my grandparents cut off all contact with my dad completely. They didn't make a big scene about it, they just stopped speaking to him. I don't even know when my dad and stepmother had the twins or what their names are. I think my grandparents went to meet the babies, because they are still their grandchildren, after all. Now I'm 25. I went to college, I have my own job, but I still live in the same city because my grandparents are getting older and need someone nearby to help them. They're not bedridden or anything, but I just feel better knowing I'm close in case they ever need assistance. A few days ago, my grandfather told me he had changed his will. He wants to leave me his entire inheritance. He said he wouldn't be giving anything to my dad or to his new children. The estate would be divided between my father's sister and me. My aunt doesn't have kids, so essentially, I'm the only grandchild in the will. I asked about my stepmother's children, and he said he wouldn't leave them anything, that it was his decision at the end of the day. And honestly, I felt really satisfied that he chose not to include them. I know they're just kids and it's not their fault, but I can't help but feel good about finally being the favorite grandchild. I deserved for someone to love me after being treated like a stranger by my own father. Besides, they don't really have a relationship with my dad's family anymore. As far as I know, my dad and stepmother never made any effort to reconnect with them either. So, they have no emotional reason to include those kids, other than the fact that they're blood. I get to be the favorite somewhere, at least. I didn't know this would blow up so quickly. Apparently, my grandfather made his decision public, as in, he told the whole family about changing his will. Before, he had planned to divide it into two parts, one for my dad and one for my aunt. The grandchildren were only going to get a symbolic amount. But I think he realized that my father would choose his new kids over me, and I can't even deny that. That's probably why he changed the will completely. I don't really know what made him decide to do it now and not earlier, though I guess I could just ask him. Anyway, yesterday I received an angry email from my stepmother, the first contact she's made with me in the last 11 years. She didn't even pretend to be polite. She started right off by saying that I had poisoned my grandparents against her and her kids, and that she couldn't just sit back while I devoured her children's rightful share. She wrote that she was going to expose my manipulation to the entire family and make sure the will was changed so that her children would get their legitimate inheritance, even if it was the last thing she did. She kept going on and on about how I was a vulture picking at the birthright of her husband and her children, and how she was glad she had sent me away back then, otherwise, I would have destroyed her family even more than I already had. Honestly, the email looked completely deranged at first glance. I mean, this crazy woman was insulting me in what was written like a formal letter, just because I stayed close to my grandparents, when she and my father never even tried. It was never my choice. I couldn't influence my grandfather to include me in anything. Hell, it wasn't even my choice to leave my house and go live with them all those years ago, they made me do it. And now she's reaping the consequences of her own behavior, and she can't handle it. She's not lactose intolerant, she's karma intolerant, and that really sucks for her. Yeah, but all of this is on her. She was a horrible woman, and now it's coming back to her. It's time she ate her big, steaming plate of consequences. And the best part is, the only people she can blame, along with her precious husband, are themselves. I showed the email to my grandfather, and we both had a good laugh. But I know him, behind that laughter, he's furious with my dad and his wife. I also know my stepmother and father aren't going to let this go, but I don't plan to make things any bigger unless I'm forced to. The karma they've gotten is well-deserved, and I'm fine with that. As for the inheritance, I honestly don't care. I wasn't expecting it, and I'd probably feel the same if my aunt got all of it. But if it drives my stepmother and, by extension, my dad crazy? Then I welcome it. It's just a small summary of the chaotic life I've had. I know I'm not the only one with a father and stepmother straight out of hell, but I wanted to share it. Update 1. My dad and stepmother paid us a little visit, and of course, they brought their precious twins, Victor and Vans, to make things even more dramatic. I really didn't have anything against the kids before meeting them. Now I genuinely believe they're chaotic little spawns of the devil, and they need to stay far away from my grandparents. They knocked on the door, my grandma opened it, and there they stood. None of us knew what to say, but my stepmother barged in, dragging a child by each hand. She asked where my grandfather was, and I told her he was busy. He actually was, but obviously she didn't believe me. She said she would wait and that she wasn't leaving until she talked to him. My grandmother went to get him, with a grin on her face, because she had told me earlier she was expecting this and wanted me to join in on the fun. My grandmother is a petty queen, and I love her for it. She holds grudges, but only against people who truly deserve it. It was awkward at first, nobody spoke to anyone, while the kids were wrestling in a corner of the room. Seriously, they're so poorly raised, who wrestles in a stranger's house? My grandparents were practically strangers to them, so you'd think they'd at least behave. After a few minutes, my dad tried to break the ice by asking how I'd been. I don't know why, but that really annoyed me. I told him if he was trying to make small talk, it wasn't necessary, and if he was genuinely asking about me, it would take a long time to summarize the last 11 years of my life, for my sperm donor. He turned bright red and shut up, and honestly, I was secretly proud of myself for standing up to him like that. By then, my grandparents had come into the room, and I got up to leave. But they stopped me and said I was an adult and had every right to be there. Then my stepmother jumped in and said she wasn't going to talk to them in front of that idiot. My grandmother laughed and said, "Well, in that case, you probably shouldn't talk in front of a mirror." It was hilarious. My stepmother was up on her high horse, pretending to have the moral high ground, when we all knew she'd come here to beg for a piece of the inheritance. But with that attitude, she was really ruining any chance of negotiation. Oh, and by the way, in that tense atmosphere, her kids were still wrestling, and now they'd moved to the center of the room. My grandfather shot my father a look, and Dad tried to get them to stop, with no success. It was so funny I couldn't help but laugh. And since my grandfather had basically given me a free pass to be as rude and insolent as I wanted, I didn't even care how I looked. I was just there to enjoy it. But my grandfather wasn't joking around. He asked why they had decided to honor us, sarcastically, with their presence after so many years. My stepmother jumped in before my dad could even answer. He looked completely defeated, and I had this general sense that maybe, just maybe, my dad wanted some sort of reconciliation or at least to handle things differently. But his darling wife clearly had other ideas. She said she didn't like that I had manipulated my grandparents into naming me the sole heir of their estate. She said I was taking the rightful share that belonged to her husband and children. She was painting me as the villain who had deceived the poor old couple, while she was supposedly the savior coming to make them see reason. It was like she lived in her own world, completely detached from reality. My grandfather was honestly amused by her. She didn't even realize it, but she was making an absolute fool of herself. Once she finished her little speech, my grandfather told her she was not welcome in his house. He said she was an unfit mother and an unfit partner, that she had chosen to abandon a child who had just lost her mother, that she had driven me away from my father because she'd been playing twisted mind games. And for that, she wouldn't get a single cent from him. Then he turned to my dad, and what he said to him will probably be burned into his memory forever. If I had been in my dad's place and had to hear those words about myself, I think I would have died of shame on the spot. My grandfather said he had always tried to be a good father to both my dad and my aunt, and a good husband to my grandmother. He said maybe he'd made a few mistakes here and there, but overall, he believed he'd been a decent example. So he couldn't, for the life of him, understand how his son had turned out the way he had, a useless, spineless doormat for a horrible woman who didn't deserve anything. He said my father had failed as a husband, that when his real wife, my mother, was sick and suffering, he had left her to depend on me to keep things going. Everyone knew he hadn't helped Mom physically because he didn't want to. He had all the time in the world, and he chose not to. My grandfather reminded him of a time in his childhood when my grandmother had been very ill, and my grandfather stayed up late every night to care for her, then went to work in the morning. He told my father that he wasn't his son, because he had abandoned his own child. That I was his daughter too, but my dad had forgotten that. He said he didn't even blame my stepmother for it, because she was an outsider. My dad should have been the one to put his foot down when she was mistreating me. But he let it go on for so long that he got used to it. And eventually, my stepmother succeeded in completely alienating father and daughter. My grandfather had tears in his eyes, he was so ashamed of my father. He said I hadn't manipulated him into doing anything, that he had chosen to give me that inheritance because I deserved it, my father didn't. He said he was utterly disappointed in him, and that if my dad didn't want to take responsibility, meaning raising me, then he had no right to claim a share of the inheritance. My dad simply stood up and left, with my stepmother and the kids scurrying out behind him. I honestly didn't expect him to say anything, there wasn't really anything he could say. To be honest, it felt incredibly therapeutic to have someone finally stand up for me, to make my dad face himself in the mirror. I won't lie, it felt amazing. Update 2. I thought the drama was finally over, but apparently not. After the way my grandfather completely tore into both my stepmother and my dad, I never would have imagined he'd have the guts to contact any of us again. But then I got an email from him. It seemed heartfelt, but I really don't believe the sincerity it claimed to have. It was a long message. Basically, my dad was apologizing for failing me my entire life. He said that when my mom got sick, he felt like his life had ended. He became selfish and couldn't think beyond himself. And when he met my stepmother after mom's death, he thought he finally had a chance at happiness again. In his selfishness, he held on to that so tightly that he sacrificed even me in the process. He added that he wasn't trying to justify his behavior, because, as he said, everything my grandfather had told him was absolutely right. He said he just wanted me to understand what had been going through his mind. It was disgusting, even by his own admission, but it was what it was. He said there had been several times he'd wanted to reach out to me, but he never did because he didn't know what to say, and because he knew my stepmother wouldn't like it. He said he had become a slave to what she wanted, to the point where he didn't even realize how harmful he was being. He said he believed he had already ruined things once with mom, and then again, with me. So he really didn't want to mess things up with my stepmother, which is why he just kept doing whatever she told him to. To him, she was his last source of happiness, his final beacon of hope, and she knew that perfectly well and exploited it to the fullest. He wrote that he had never expected my grandfather to give him anything, and that the entire scene that unfolded that day was my stepmother's doing. He said he was ashamed, both of himself and of her, for everything that happened. That was basically the summary of what he wrote. There was a lot more, but nothing that really mattered. When I finished reading it, I knew exactly what I had to do: show it to my grandparents so they could have a good laugh, too. I hate it when people write exactly what they think you want to hear just to get something out of you. In this case, they weren't trying to get anything from me, but from my grandparents. If even a fraction of what he wrote was true, he should have tried long before now. But everything conveniently happens at the exact moment he gets cut out of the will. Too much of a coincidence, don't you think? I decided not to reply to his email. There's no point. I didn't accept his apology, and I don't even want it. He can shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Maybe he's doing it because he wants to show remorse and then use it to stake a claim on the inheritance. Or maybe he's genuinely sorry and has seen the error of his ways, or maybe, of his canine instincts, thanks to that bitch of a wife. But I don't want to know. What he did to me is something he has to live with. I don't think he even deserves a reply, not even one asking him to leave me alone. He removed himself from my life, and he'll stay that way. I'm not giving him any window to come back and ruin me again. So yeah, that's it. Today I'm closing the curtains on this chapter forever, and I know I won't regret it. Update 3. My father came by to talk, this time without his wife and kids. He must have realized they weren't helping his case. I wasn't home when it happened, but I found out as soon as I got back and saw my grandparents wearing the kind of mischievous smiles kids have when they've done something naughty. Of course, they spilled every single detail. Apparently, my dad showed up about 5 minutes after I left, so I think he was watching the house, waiting for me to leave so he could talk to my grandparents alone. I don't have proof, but the content of his visit completely contradicts what he wrote in that email, and clearly, he preferred having the conversation without me there. Anyway, he knocked on the door, and my grandparents let him in. They had already read the email I mentioned in my previous post, and they wanted to see what he had to say for himself. He started with some small talk, asking how they'd been, saying he wanted to check in because the other day, in the heat of the moment, they hadn't really had a chance to catch up. Classic flattery. He did the same thing with me, and now he was trying it on them. But let's get to the real reason he came. He wanted to know if there was any chance that part of the inheritance could still go to him. He said he understood they loved me very much and admitted he had behaved badly in the past, so it was only fair that I received my share. But then he added that his sister, my aunt, didn't really need it, so maybe they could give her share to him. Or perhaps they could split it between them. I want to clarify something I've seen a lot in the comments. When people hear the word inheritance, they imagine a woman lying on a pile of $100 bills because her grandparents left her millions. That's not the case here. My grandparents have their house and some savings, enough to last them until they pass. Whatever's left after that, plus the house, is the inheritance. My father is doing all of this for nothing. Maybe it's $30,000, maybe $10,000, maybe $100. But I don't think it's a life-changing amount for him. I've thought about it, I've discussed it with my inner voice. Yes, it has a name, but I'm not telling you what it is, and I think my stepmother is the one behind all this. She needs to win. She wants my father's full attention. She wants me erased from existence so that, in some twisted way, my father's past with my mother is erased too. In her mind, any money or property belonging to my grandparents has to belong to her, so I get nothing. It's not even about financial need, they're not struggling, they don't need this for an emergency. They're just that petty. And my father, being her loyal little messenger, came to negotiate at least a portion of the money so that his wife wouldn't feel so insecure about herself. I don't even know if she's aware of his little negotiation attempt. But I'm sure she won't settle for that. My grandfather could be the kindest man alive, the greatest person, the kind who might give someone a bit of money and tell them not to spend it all in one place. But he's not going to do that this time. The conversation basically revolved around that in the end, and I don't want to bore you with my father's endless pleading, the whole, please, do it for me, for your son, and my grandparents just replying no. He even called me a brat again, which completely contradicts his little pity party email. I'll just say that when my grandfather finally got tired of his begging, he sat him down, figuratively speaking, and said, "Look, son, if I had a coin for every time you acted like a doormat and made me want to smack you over the head, I wouldn't have that many, but I'd have enough to fill a sock and hit you with it." My dad said he was being unreasonable, and my grandfather shot back, "The more you talk, the more I fill the sock, and the more it's going to hurt." After that, my father left. Even hours later, when I came home, my grandparents were still laughing about it. It's a lost cause for him, he's not going to get anything. And my grandfather wasn't joking about the sock. Update 4. Why do people think my stepmother is crazy? With everything I've told you about her, you'd think she's just a poor lost soul, a sad little creature who's simply lost her way. You're crazy if you think she could ever do something truly insane. This update isn't about that. If you came here expecting some wild story of her doing something stupid, you might as well stop reading now, because this post is clearly going to be about all the good things she and my father have done. I know there must be many, so I won't let you think badly of her. Still reading? Good, congratulations. Let's talk about the stupid things my stepmother and father have done. So, I have to go back a few months, shortly after my father's visit to my grandparents. A few days later, my stepmother called me from a friend's number, crying, saying that I had ruined their lives, that I was a vile person, and that society was going to hell because of people like me. The last part was the worst because it made me imagine a society full of people like her, and it gave me chills. I replied, "Stop being a miserable adult throwing tantrums. You're broke because you're a spiteful possum." It wasn't the cleverest comeback, she caught me off guard, but I just wanted to tell her she was a miserable, pouting woman, because I still remember when she used those exact words on me. Things were quiet for a few weeks, until we heard from my father. Someone from the hospital called, he couldn't use his emergency contact, my stepmother, because she was the one who had sent him there in the first place. My stepmother swears on her 2 children, which is basically the same as swearing on the devil, that it was an accident. But my father's terrified of her, because instead of reversing the car while leaving the garage, she drove forward. He was in there working with his tools at the time. Sure, anyone can get confused with modern automatic transmissions, instead of putting it in reverse, you accidentally choose run over your husband. But my father insists it happened right after they'd had an argument the night before, during which his loving wife had threatened him. My grandparents went to see him at the hospital, but I chose not to. My father didn't want to give details, and the police opened an investigation, which was later dismissed as an accident. An accident that pinned my father's leg between the car and his workbench, leaving it at a strange angle with multiple fractures. I've lost count of how many surgeries he's had trying to repair that leg. My grandmother even suggested buying a magnetic abacus to stick on the fridge just to keep track, but they never followed through. My father still swears she did it intentionally, and after leaving the hospital, he filed for divorce. Yes, but as my grandfather says, he's a doormat and always will be, because he didn't ask for full custody. He basically split everything 50-50 and only kept the house, which was his to begin with. My grandfather joked that this year he's going to ask Santa for a gift sack to keep his coins in, because his sock has a hole from being too heavy. So there's my father now, sharing custody with a woman he believes tried to kill him, drowning in hospital debt, and still not fully recovered from his injury. He has to go to physical therapy regularly to regain full mobility. Edit, it's possible my father did ask for full custody but didn't get it. My grandfather just chooses to believe he never even tried. That's all we know from our side.